began long before June, of 2019 when I was hired. I think it's important to remember that this past season, my first in the in the NBA, was my 21st in coaching, and my experiences in all those other years as a coach, and even as a girl and a young woman before that, set me up for this point in my career, right? It doesn't stand alone as, this time that I was an NBA coach. There's so much, I think, that went into it. So I think that's the interesting stuff I hope we can get to today, right? That being a woman for, 21 years as a coach and even 20 years before that, I think uniquely prepared me for this time in my life and this role. So before I get into all the story of it and the past, I do think, I don't want to bury the lead. And the lead is the here and now and the present and what I get asked the most, which is, how is it different to coach men than it is to coach women? And I think I need to start with what I really believe, and I've done a lot of thinking about this, particularly over this last year as I've been in this new situation. What is the essence of coaching? And I think the most important thing that I can say is that the qualities that athletes value in their coaches transcend gender. So let me say that again. I think the qualities that elite athletes, college athletes, probably even young people, the values and the qualities that they value most transcend gender. So what I like to call my 4 factors. So in the NBA, there's a lot of analytics. So without kind of exposing myself as too much of a nerd, which I totally am a nerd, I would draw a comparison. So there's a term in analytics with basketball called the 4 factors, right? They say you can look quickly after a game at 4 things: effective field goal percentage, turnover rate, offensive rebounding, and free throw rate. And maybe this is for a whole nother presentation sometime on analytics if you ever invite me back. But those are considered the 4 factors. And you can look quickly after a game and say, how do we do in the 4 factors? Well, I kind of made my own 4 factors of the essence of coaching. And they are, number 1, do you know your stuff? Are you competent? Have you mastered your craft? That's what players care about. Secondly, can you help me get better, right? Like, do you have an ability to take that knowledge as a coach and transfer it to a young woman or a man and help them get better at what they do? Thirdly, can you relate to me, right? Is there a human connection between the two of us? And if and when there is, which is really important, do you actually care about me beyond basketball? So I'm gonna tell you a couple stories that kind of, to me, over the course of my career have really shown in practice how these 4 factors define who you are as a coach, and I think define your level of success. So when I first got to Cal, I was the head coach for the past 8 years, but I first arrived as an assistant. And I had come from the University of Richmond, which is a small private school in Richmond, Virginia, where I worked for a woman named Joanne Boyle, who was very successful at Richmond when I was working for her there, and she got the Cal job. So I flew out with her to Cal, and that's kind of how the coaching profession works, right? If your boss takes a job, you either go along or you don't have a job. And I had some fears in the first time I went to Cal. We were very successful at Richmond, but maybe this type of player that we coached was more in my previous experiences. I played basketball in the Ivy League. There were no All-Americans on the team. People tended to have maybe backgrounds that I was more familiar with. Well, going out to Cal, when we got the job, we inherited what was at the time the #1 recruiting class in the country. 2 McDonald's All-Americans hailing right from Oakland, California, some really talented players. And there was a young woman on that team named Devanay Hampton, 6'4", incredibly athletic, grew up with a rough background. And I remember the first time meeting Devanay, I was scared, right? Like, why is she going to listen to me, right? She's so much more talented than I've ever been. Or what can I tell her? And I think she looked at me, a girl from Scarsdale, New York, probably like I was an alien, right? There wasn't much in common, but I was coaching the post players at Cal, and she was a post player. And it was probably the first workout when I got into my comfort zone of teaching her footwork and things on the court that right away, I think she believed and knew that I knew my stuff, right? The relationship piece of it probably took a little bit more time. And I remember vividly at the end of her freshman year, I mean, we had a good relationship at that time. I was her post coach. I think she knew I could help her get better. She was, first team all Pac-12 her rookie year, but the deep relationship piece happened after her freshman year when she needed surgery on her knee. And she had asked me, do you mind driving me to the surgery center to go get my surgery? And, of course I kind of did a self-check. And when I had my knee surgery in high school, I think my mom, my dad, every family member in the world was calling, checking in, right? My experience is, your family takes you. And she asked me to take her. So of course I took her. And we're going into the surgery center, and the doctor is giving us the instructions of once she gets out of the surgery, this is what the brace she's going to have, and this is what to give the meds. And I said, okay, well, I'm not necessarily going to be the one. She said my mom's coming to pick me up, and I'm not going to be the one here, but I'll pass on the information. And I sat and waited in the waiting room for someone to come, and nobody came. And then I waited a little bit longer and a little bit longer, and nobody came, right? And Dev had a wonderful family. There were just some struggles, and someone couldn't be there that day. So I ended up taking her home, driving her to her home, which was her grandmother's home in East Oakland. And, this is a kind of an extreme example of, do you care about me? Can you relate to me? But me being in her home, and, she was a little bit drugged up on the meds that they gave. And, there were a lot of little kids in the back room and not a ton of food in the refrigerator. So I went to go get the Gatorade and, picked up some stuff for them, which, probably is against NCAA rules, but it's okay. I'm not in the NCAA anymore. And if they want to take me down for that, I'll live with it. But it was a moment where I think from then on, I wasn't just her coach, we were family. And I think she believed that I cared about her beyond basketball. And then it didn't matter if I came from Scarsdale, New York, or Oakland, if I was a man, a woman, married, not married, we were in it together. And it was a lesson for me that, from then on, and Devonay and her children were in my wedding. And, I've been with her at major life events, for her. That's the type of thing to me that defines what athletes care about. Fast forwarding, 15 years or however long it's been to my time with the Cavs, I will say my moment of, do you know your stuff, happened early this season. I think they accepted me right away. It was not a difficult transition in terms of, I don't think there was skepticism in that locker room, but you need a moment, right? For them to know, do you know your stuff? And we played a couple of preseason games, and we had a preseason road trip, and we played at the Pistons, and then we were going to go straight to play at the Celtics. And Dan Gilbert, our team owner, lives in Detroit. And so the plan was, the night after we played the Pistons, we were going to stay over, practice in Detroit at Dan Gilbert's home to spend some time with him, and then fly to Boston. Well, the Boston scout was my scout, right? So my first scout in the NBA. And we were on the bus heading from the hotel to the Gilbert home, and then we were going to go straight to Boston from there. And my boss at the time, Coach Beeline, looked at me on the bus. It was about a 45-minute bus ride, and said, hey, the front office mentioned that Dan Gilbert wants to see a scouting report along with practice. So you're going to do your scout, you're going to present your scout today instead of tomorrow. So I said, okay. And I had a 40-minute, I was ready, but I had a 40-minute bus ride to kind of prep this idea that my first scout is in the NBA is going to be not only in front of our players, which might be, a little nerve-wracking for the first time, but in front of the owner of the team and the entire front office. But you know what? I never felt as comfortable in my own skin as a Cleveland Cavaliers coach until that moment when I sat on the couch and I did what I've done 10,000 times before, which is deliver a scouting report. So Tristan Thompson on my right, Kevin Love on my left, and we're talking about what the Celtics are going to do. And I felt more at home than I ever had before. And I think that was a moment, with the guys, a bunch of them were like fist bumping me after, because I think they knew it was my first one. But the do you know your stuff piece, I think that was important for me. The can you relate to me piece, I spent a lot of time with the rookies, right, when they were first drafted and they came in ahead of everybody. And, there's a lot of talk about Kevin Porter Jr. and that, he had a college career. I mean, obviously it was only one season, but there were some ups and downs. And, I'd heard from a number of people that, he has to trust you in order for him to be as successful as possible. Well, for me, that's the easy part, right? Like asking him, why do you wear number 4? What's important to you? What makes you who you are? That type of thing. I think he and I kind of created that bond right away, because you just have to care about them. And then lastly, I'll tell you one more story that, is similar. We were on a road trip, and we had an off day. It was in between playing Minnesota and flying to Toronto. So in the NBA, one thing I learned quickly, there's a lot more games than practices. And when you're on a back-to-back, the next day automatically has to be an off day. So we can't practice, what have you. So we were going to fly to Toronto, and that was going to be the off day. And there will be often 2 buses to the plane. So you can either take the 10:15 bus or the 11 o'clock bus. I'm not really sure why. They probably just want to give people who need a little more time or what have you. So I said, I had a scout coming up again. So I said to myself, you know what? I'm going to get a good breakfast and work on my scout, and I'll take the second bus. Well, when I went down to breakfast, Caleb was sitting with our strength coach, and I kind of took the table next to him. I said, hey, you guys good if I sit here? And they're like, yeah, of course. And I said, okay. And I went to the buffet to get some food. And by the time I came back, the strength coach had gone, and it was just Kevin. And, Kevin and I get along great. But, we hadn't necessarily spent a ton of time together away from the court. So my plan was to just open up my laptop and work on my scout while we were both sitting there. But turns out I never opened my computer, because we just ended up talking for an hour. We almost missed the second bus. But, we're talking about my career and his things and, moments where he's felt certain ways. And one thing he told me in that conversation that covered a lot of different things is, he was talking about negative experience with coaches and positive experiences with coaches. And one of the things he said about an experience negatively with a coach, he said, I can count on one hand the number of times that person made me feel good. That's what he said. Now here's a guy who makes $30 million, and he's a Hall of Fame player, and it mattered to him how coaches make him feel. And he also said, at the time, Lindsay, I'd run through a wall for you because of conversations like this, right? And so I go back to the idea that they don't care. The highest level athletes don't care whether you're male or female. They care if you know your stuff, if you can help them get better, if you can relate to them, and if you care about them beyond basketball. So sorry, that was longer, stories than I thought, but I kind of want to bring these things to life for you. I think this is important as well, kind of in addition to the 4 factors. I do think that part of who I am as a coach is linked to attributes that do differentiate me. What I mean by that is I think you can't define, everyone's on some kind of spectrum, right? Women aren't all one way and men aren't all one way, clearly. But I do think my perspective as a female is part of my value to this organization. And I don't shy away from that. So what I mean by that is it could be attributes that are maybe traditionally feminine, like empathy or emotional IQ, open-mindedness. Again, not that all men don't have that, not that all women have that, but the ability to listen. I don't shy away from those being things I think that differentiate me in a positive way, or even things like my experiences in women's basketball. Hey, this is how the UConn women run this offense. Have we thought about that? Or this is what I'm seeing trends wise in women's basketball versus men's basketball. I think that knowledge base, similarly with people studying the European game, it just makes you more valuable. So as I say that the 4 factors do transcend gender, I believe that. I also don't shy away from the fact that, I have different perspectives, and I think diversity, adds quality to any organization, especially coaching staffs. So I think that, as we talk about keys to being successful in a man's world, I think it's important to look at maybe some qualities that allow you to be successful or add value to whatever organization you're working with, that maybe are universal across professions or aspects of life, right? Because all of you aren't necessarily in coaching, but I do hope I can add some keys and thoughts as to what makes women successful in any aspect, right? So the first thing I would say is to be authentic. I do feel like I've always brought my whole self to the job. And that's unique because coaching, I think, is a lifestyle job. Like there's not a ton of separation. You know, players become family, and your family is your team often. But I mean my whole self. Like my players were joking around and kidding me about being a nerd pretty much from the time I got in the profession, because I'm not afraid to kind of be a nerd. I watch a lot of basketball. I read things, you know, and I'll quote, you know, Aristotle or somebody in our pregame talk, and they're like, who are you talking about, right? Or, you know, I would be known to say, they're going to miss the next 5 shots because of regression to the mean. And of course, only the analytics major knows what I'm talking about, or the statistics major. So, you know, being a nerd, you know, I care deeply about the players that I coach and the goals that we have. I've been known to cry in the locker room after wins. I've been known to get emotional in ways, right? And I don't shy away from any of that. And similarly, you know, when I was fortunate enough to be able to have a family, you know, to marry my husband, Patrick, and have our son, Jordan, I wanted to bring that part of myself to the job as well. And so you can see in this slide is our little guy, Jordan, who's now 3, but my entire first year of coaching as a mother, you know, he was in a lot of staff meetings and he was around the office a lot, because I promised the players I would be just as accessible to them. There just might be a baby around. And sure enough, you know, I was nursing during meetings at times and bringing him on road trips. And that just felt authentic for me. And I didn't want to change that in the NBA either. And I think the second thing I would say for women in terms of being successful in any aspect is, you know, lean into your fears. I know lean in is kind of a, you know, popularized term, but what I mean is acknowledge them, let yourself feel them, figure out what they are. And by lean into them, I mean, it's okay to go there anyway, right? I think you have more power over your fears if you say what they are. And if you sit with them and then you have more ability to overcome them versus letting them then stop you up. I would say another piece of advice I would have is aspire to be great, right? Exceed expectations. I do think that I'm very conscious of the fact that when you are one of something, or you are a minority in a group as a woman, you know, in the NBA, I'm conscious of a need to be better than average, to be better than what people expect of me. And I do think that unique pressure and stress can be positive. You have to keep it in perspective. It has to be healthy. But I think a desire to be great and to ultimately define yourself by your work and not by, you know, your status of being female or different or new or whatever it may be. I felt the same way when I think my first year as a head coach at UC Santa Barbara, I was the youngest coach in the NCAA tournament. Like, I was conscious of that because, you know, if I had fallen on my face, it hurts the opportunity for other young coaches or to get opportunities. So I think you can use those circumstances to aspire to be great and to drive you to exceed expectations. And at the same time, as women, I do think we need to be very conscious of not letting the notion of perfection hinder you, right? We've all heard kind of those stats where if there's a job posting and it has, you know, 6 criteria, right? Women will say, oh, darn, I have 5 out of 6 I can't apply. Whereas men tend to say, oh, I've got 1 of them, I'm good, I should get the job. And so I do think that sometimes as women, we feel like if we're not perfectly ready or we don't have every box checked, then we can't do it. And for me, I really had to make sure that going into this job in the NBA, you know, I knew I was qualified, I knew I could bring something, but I also had to be okay to understand, of course, I'm not going to be perfect at something that, you know, I haven't been doing for 20 years, you know, the way other people might have. Not that they're perfect, but that, you know, I didn't want to let the notion of perfection hinder me from trying. And that was the case with many of my job moves throughout the notion of my career as well. So I think it's important also, and my understanding is that, you know, we have several generations, you know, of women on this call, from, you know, grandparents to daughters to granddaughters. And I do think it's our duty to empower each other from generation to generation. And so I think it's important to talk about what prepared me to be successful in this role. Because again, I think many of the things that set me up happened long before, you know, I picked up a clipboard or a basketball. And I think the first thing is I was always encouraged to dream as a kid. I honestly can't remember one time that anyone in my close circle, especially my parents and my siblings, told me that I couldn't. There was a very long time, maybe from when I was like 5 to when I was, I don't know, 12, that I wanted to be the shortstop for the New York Yankees. And I don't remember hearing anyone in my family saying, well, you can't do that. There's no girls, you know, doing that. Then they drafted this guy named Derek Jeter, and that shot down my dreams. But it wasn't because, you know, anyone in my circle told me I couldn't do it. For a while, I wanted to be a senator and a Supreme Court justice. And I can't remember anyone saying you can't do that. And so when I was a senior in college and decided I wanted to be a basketball coach, no one told me I couldn't do that either. You know, I came from a family of lawyers, but there was no pressure that you have to do this because it looks a certain way, or you have to do this because of X, Y, or Z. There was always sort of support. And I think that's played a huge factor in my ability to believe that I could do anything. I also believe really strongly in the notion of kind of bloom where you're planted. This idea, I speak to a lot of young coaches who kind of ask me about career path. And I think coaching, like a lot of things, there's no one absolute path. I think there are a lot of ways to get where you want to go, but I think one of the most specific things is be good at what you're doing. Think about how you can grow, think about how you can be better versus always thinking about what's next. I think wanting to be really good and in your mind, maybe having dreams, but not necessarily having a specific plan. I need to do A, B, and C to get from here to here to here will make you more successful in the job that you're in. And I think it'll make you naturally more acclimated to know when maybe it is a good time for a move. I learned that much of that from my father. He did a lot of interesting things in his career. He was a politician. He was in the, a state liquor commissioner for the state of New York, and then was in private practice, and then was a judge. And I remember asking him, well, how did you know? Like, how did you know what to do next? And he was kind of like, you're too type A and you're silly, right? Like you just sort of know what feels right. You do the right thing. You follow your passion, and then it'll end up driving you to the right places. And I think that in my career, that's sort of what has allowed me to be successful. I was an assistant coach for 9 years. I loved being an assistant coach. I started at Syracuse. I then went to the University of New Hampshire because it was a bigger role. I could, recruit. Then I went to the University of Richmond with the boss that I mentioned, who became my mentor. She had coached a friend of mine at Duke as an assistant, and she got her first head coaching job at Richmond. And the first really scary jump was Richmond to Cal as an assistant coach. I mentioned some of those fears. Then it was scary to leave Cal, which became my home and where I was really growing, to go to Santa Barbara to be a head coach. But I knew it was time. And then obviously I went back to Cal as a head coach. But when the Cavs job came about, I remember the fears that I felt about leaving what I loved and what I knew and what was my comfort zone at Cal. The feelings were very similar to how I felt when I was leaving Richmond to go to Cal. And leaving Richmond to go to Cal was the best thing that ever happened in my life, personally and professionally. I met my husband in California. I learned what it meant to be a coach. I saw success there. We got to a Final Four. I think I figured out what it was that drove me as a coach, right? So as scared as I was, it turned out to be the best thing. And I had that same kind of calmness when it ended up that I made the decision to come to the Cavs, that it's really scary. I don't know exactly what's going to come, but it feels right. So I think that what I had learned along the way prepared me for that move. I will also say, quickly, and I am cognizant of time here, the how can I grow versus what's next also played into, my philosophy as a coach, right? like I said, I dreamed about being a head coach, but I wasn't really plotting it, right? It kind of took a natural progression. I dreamed about going to a Final Four, but when I got the Cal job in 2011, the talks I had with that team that I knew had some talent, the first year was we set realistic goals. You know, let's finish in the top 4 of a difficult Pac-12. Let's win tough games. Let's bounce back from adversity. Those were what we talked about. The next year, which was our Final Four year, I remember I came in at the very original team meeting, and the slogan for the year was kind of, "We are ready." And I said, I don't know what this means to you, but I think to me it means we're ready to start talking about championships. We're ready to start talking about postseason, right? We had sort of set the table, so it wasn't this get to the Final Four, or we feel like failures. It was a natural progression where I think we embraced where we were and what we were doing as a group, and it allowed us to hit new heights. And similarly with the NBA, I always dreamed about the NBA, right? I love basketball. It is the highest level of the sport that I love. But I was not scheming about how to get to the NBA. And I think that's part of the reason it worked out so well. I set myself up. I put a clause in my final contract extension that I signed at Cal that, there's a big buyout if I were to go to Duke or UCLA or somewhere else. But I had them write in that there's no buyout if I want to go to the NBA. And I just wanted that in there just in case, right? There was some option to go to the NBA. And I didn't think, if the Cavs really wanted me, I don't know that they were going to necessarily pay $1 million buyout, right? I didn't want an NBA team to have to jump over that hurdle. So at some point I was obviously dreaming about the NBA, but I wasn't plotting and scheming. And I think there's a difference because it made me more ready when the time came. I will say this, and this is particularly for the young people on the call, right? I think part of my career trajectory is talking about, heading into the unexpected, right? In anybody's life journey, there will be obstacles. And what I have learned from 21 years in coaching is that the athletes that are most successful, particularly the college players that came in and were most successful in my program, what determined their ultimate level of success was less their, ranking as a recruit in high school or even their talent, not even necessarily, their background or resources. It was their ability to handle adversity and their resilience when that adversity hit, period. That's it. It was the number one determining factor in how well someone did, right? So for me, my kind of huge obstacles were, I tore my ACL my senior year of high school. At the time, it was the most devastating thing that had ever happened to me in my life. I was so tight with my group of teammates and friends, and it was taken away from me in that instant. But ultimately, it forced me to realize exactly how much I love basketball. It gave me my first glimpse of watching from a different perspective, although I was always kind of a nerd, like I mentioned. And I had to deal with it. And I had to work my way, to be on the team at Brown. When I got there, it wasn't ideal to have torn my ACL right before, and it affected my career. I didn't play very much at Brown. I kind of sat on the end of the bench, but I think handling that crafted my journey towards being a coach. Then at the end of my freshman year of college, my mother got ill and she passed away at the beginning of my sophomore year. So this was definitely like, the year and a half time in my life that certainly wasn't the rosiest, but that life event, which obviously has kind of shaped much of how my life has gone, completely at a formative time, I think taught me, sounds cliche, but taught me what it means to take really hard stuff and grieve it and hurt for it and cry, but also to let that go and move forward in a really positive way. And part of that for me was taking a year abroad, which I don't think I would have done. My junior year had my mom not passed away. And that year abroad is where I really decided I wanted to go into coaching. All of that to say, again, jumping ahead 20 years to having a chance to go into the NBA. And I think the life things that I experienced gave me the courage and the strength and the resilience to say, I'm going to do something really different. And I know it's cool and I know it's a dream job, but it was also really hard. And I don't think that I would have done it if I had not had these obstacles along the way that I knew that I could overcome. And lastly, what I think I will finish with here before we get into some questions, is that I would be remiss if I didn't end by saying this. I absolutely love what I do. Like, I think that's a huge part of my story, right? Like, I don't think I would be successful in any, way if I didn't have a job that every single day of my life that I've had it, I've come to work saying, I can't believe I get paid to do this, right? I've had really hard days. I've had bad losses, and I've lost a recruit, and I've had, difficulties, obviously, but I every single day that I've had this profession, I've been able to say, I can't believe I get paid to do something that I love. I've loved basketball since before I can remember. And I think I realized in college that I loved like the nerdy aspect of it, the X's and O's, the game planning. But while I was in college, I had so many friends, at many different schools who had pretty much wonderful or terrible experiences as a college athlete. And much of it was informed by how they felt about their coach or their, like their team, the chemistry, that part of it. It was far more influential than what the class sizes were, in their English class. It really was. And so for me, I found this job where it was about, the X's and O's and cutting up film and finding a game plan and that kind of thing that I really liked, as well as this ability to impact others and have an impact, on their life, to find ways to make them better at what they do well, and then create opportunities for them. So in college, I was very focused on, all right, how can you use this Cal degree to network, to change your life, to change your perspective of what you can be? And I don't think that changes in the NBA, right? The vehicles are different a little bit, right? They're not college kids, but I think in the pros, you can have an impact on someone's life. I think you can help them be the best version of themselves on and off the court, and that drives me. And then, as I mentioned at the start, I think the NBA platform, gives me this opportunity to inspire and impact, hopefully, women in society on a larger level, and also guys, right? I mean, who's to say you can't have just as much of an impact on, the 21-year-old or 30-year-old, man that I'm in the locker room with every day. So I know that's a lot. I know I've been speaking for a while. So I will stop it there, and hopefully we can have some great questions. But all of that, I think, is a little bit of my story with what I'm doing now and how I got there. And I'm really appreciative to be able to share it with you all.
Oh, wow. Lindsay, you are so inspiring. I think we're all clapping. It's just that you can't see us. And I find myself, it's so interesting. If you had said to me this morning, you're going to meet this woman and she's a mom in your school next year, assuming we can all go to school. And there are so many things about the way you talked about basketball that are the way I feel about teaching, and specifically teaching girls. I wrote down all these notes to say to the girls. And then I'm like, wait a minute, maybe Lindsay will come at some point and talk to the girls. So I have about 600 questions, but what's so funny is I've just crossed off questions that you answered in your great presentation. So thank you for that. I love when you talked about being the very best version of ourselves. And at Laurel, we have an expression for girls: if you can see it, you can be it. And I think when you talk about your platform about changing for women, but then I was so happy you said the second part, which is changing for men. Your presence in the NBA, I hope it won't be long that you're not the only, that you're not always feeling like, oh yeah, it's just me. Because I feel like that's also a great responsibility. It's a great privilege, but with it also comes that responsibility of sort of speaking for your whole gender. So I have several questions that you didn't answer, so I thought I would ask you. When you were coaching at Cal in your 12-13 team, which don't think I know, but my son knew, you became known as a team that had fun. And you emphasized this as their coach. And I'm curious about whether or not that's different in the NBA, where the players are older and fun may not be seen as a primary goal, or because of your authenticity, if you brought that determination to have fun into your coaching.
Yeah, I think that's that was really the essence of that team. I don't know if anyone ever saw any of the videos or anything, but it was a really dynamic group. And here's the thing, this was like one of my things I would say in recruiting all the time, that like, I just don't believe that college athletics needs to be miserable. until 10 or 15 years later, when you look back and say, oh, I guess I learned some things, right? Like I believe that fun doesn't always mean easy, right? Like sprints were hard, there were tough practices, but I think what I wanted our players was to enjoy the overall experience, to believe even on their bad days, on the day when they shot 3 for 15 or rolled their ankle or it was raining out, that they still felt like they were part of something big. And I do think it really took hold in that team. And I hope in all the Cal teams I had, even ones that didn't go to the Final Four. So I believe in the NBA. It's business. They understand that. They're professionals. But I absolutely think they want to enjoy the experience. I think they play better when they are, in general, bought into what you're doing. And if you hear the guys, there are 3 guys on the team this year, Tristan, Deli, and Kevin, who were on the championship team. And obviously that championship team had LeBron and other talented pieces, but they said there was something special about it bond-wise as well. So I think it absolutely translates to the NBA, where, people who are happy tend to be better at everything they're doing. So again, don't mistake it for goofy, and not practicing hard or not being held accountable in certain things. But I think this idea of you don't need to be a jerk, right, as a coach is important. And in fact, I think in the NBA, it's even more of a partnership. I think in college, there's still a little bit more of, it's a little bit of a dictatorship with younger people. So I actually would say it probably, that the prevailing notion is probably even more prevalent in the NBA, that you need to create an environment where guys want to come to work every day.
Right. No, I love that. So one of the things I've been thinking about is, what have you all been doing? We've been out of school since March 13th. What have you and the Cavs been doing while we couldn't play?
Yeah, we miss each other a lot. Talk about people who spent literally our entire adult lives as a part of a team, and now we can't be around people. It's not easy, but as a coaching staff, we do Zoom meetings twice a week. On those Zoom meetings, we're taking on just some X's and O's projects. So I had, breaking down all of our pick and rolls, on offense and then defensively. And so each staff member has different projects where we just kind of talk about stuff. We've broken down the draft prospects and talked about, when the draft happens, like who we like and that whole thing. With the players, we've done group Zooms and tried to just connect with them. Colin is one of my individual players that I work with. So I've broken down film for him and we've watched it together on FaceTime. But the longer it goes, the harder it's getting. We did open the facility about 2 weeks ago for voluntary workouts. It's very, very controlled. There's like one coach, one player, gloves,
right.
12 feet apart. So it's not really like a bonding time per se, but that's at least brought people back into the gym, which I think is good for people's mental health. But it's been hard. We just try to stay connected as much as we possibly can.
Right. The players don't have to wear gloves, do they, when they're playing?
No, just the coaches. Just the coaches.
That would be really weird, I think.
Yeah.
When you talk about mentorship, would you share with us who some of your mentors have been?
Yeah. So my boss that I mentioned, Joanne Boyle, she was an assistant coach at Duke, where my best friend played. So I got to know her. Then she hired me at Richmond and I came with her to Cal. She definitely, from a career standpoint, one of the things that really helped me, I think. So I went to work for her when she was a first-time head coach. And she sort of said, will you partner with me and do this versus being, just an assistant. She gave me a lot of responsibility. And then watching her take over a second time a program at Cal, was so from a professional standpoint, she really taught me a lot of the work ethic and kind of how to be a really good college coach. Then I just do a lot of time studying other coaches and their styles. So Tara Vanderveer at Stanford, while it was our rival school, and we had some battles, it was really a benefit to my career to have her across the bay and just see how she has 1,000 wins, right? So you think about winning 30 games a year for 30 years, and that only gives you 900, right? Like I can't even wrap my mind around the number of wins. And yet just kind of being close to her and seeing how she's done it, I would consider her someone that I look to. I've followed a lot of other coaches' careers. I don't know them personally, but take cues from like Pete Carroll, who played music at practice with the Seahawks and was very much like, let them have their personalities kind of thing. And then I have, obviously my parents were the original kind of people that shaped sort of the way I look at the world. And now my siblings, I have my oldest sister is a professor at NYU Law School who doesn't think sports at all. So it's very good for me to toss ideas off of her when she comes from a completely different perspective. So I would say those are a handful.
Great.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you, I always ask women when they're talking to our students, about a mistake you made and how you rallied from it. So you talked about the ACL, and certainly we see that with our athletes, that it's just one day you're playing and the next day you're sidelined for a long time, and the resilience that kids need to move through that. Is there anything that you offer for kids who find themselves injured to just, beyond your own personal integrity and grit that clearly helped you get through, and that incredibly loving family that your young player at Cal did not have when you sort of stood in? Is there anything you offer young student athletes when they get hurt?
I mean, the first thing I would say is you have to allow yourself to grieve things, right? Like for me at the time, tearing my ACL was really, really terrible. It's not, I didn't need to someone to tell me like nobody died, right? Like I knew nobody died. Like I think we have to give, and I've spoken, to a couple kind of graduation type things, and I've told young people like, it's okay to grieve what you've lost in this pandemic. Because you're grieving the loss of your prom doesn't mean that you don't care about 90,000 lives, right? Or, people who are losing, finances and stuff. It's okay to grieve your injury. Right. But I think there's this process of, grieve, feel it, let yourself feel it, and then get to the place where you can kind of start being productive. And so I think that I would tell people that are injured that you can't control what happened, but I do think that the lessons you can learn from overcoming an injury are actually more beneficial than just kind of sailing through. And I believe that. And particularly because most young athletes are not going to, make their livelihood off their physical, sports abilities. So the ability to overcome an injury, say this is really hard. And then I think you can also develop new relationships from that. Like for me, it literally gave me some perspective, which later on allowed me to become a coach. I mean, it literally shaped my life. But I met people, I've connected with people. It's maybe
somebody gave you a clipboard, and I love that story.
Yeah.
Can I ask you two more quick questions before we wrap up?
Sure.
One is, does your faith influence your coaching or the way you're living your life?
So I absolutely think in coaching, it is an incredibly public profession. There are incredible highs and lows. And again, I put it in perspective. Like, I know it's not, trying to get enough money to put food on the table. Like I'm not, comparing it to people who are, or not people who are on the front lines in an ER, but it is such an emotional profession in so many ways that I absolutely believe you have to be able to find that space in yourself that transcends message boards, what people think, all of this. So whether that's a Zen moment, a moment with the God you believe in, a moment with your faith, a walk, I think have found ways to deal with failure. Someone mentioned the record at the beginning. Like I hear that 82 losses more than I hear anything else, right? Like each one is painful. So I think I found a way to center myself. I also find ways to I think use faith and belief in something bigger in when I handle individual circumstances with players. What is my role here? What are we trying to do? So I think it informs sort of the greater way that I shape my walk on the earth kind of thing, and how I treat people more than, I don't necessarily like sit in prayer or something before a game specifically, but I think it informs the way that I handle, a very kind of emotional job.
That's beautiful. I wrote down your four factors because it struck me as I've been a headmistress now for 16 years, but I've been a school teacher for 39. And I thought to myself, everything you say there about coaching is of course the same in school teaching, that kids want to know your stuff, that you can help them get better, that you can relate to them, and that you care about them as a person. So thank you for that. My last question is really about Jordan and you. And as a working mom, I always talk about the struggle to juggle. And I wonder if you would share with us anything that you do that is super fun with your boy, or any ways that you refresh and recharge without your boy.
Yeah. So I mentioned a little bit that when I first had him, I was, it was important to me to take the actual maternity, right? Like coaching in college is so 24/7 that I met with the team and I said, I just need this 3 months. Like I'm going to be here, but I'm not going to be like, texting every second or whatever. So that was really important to me. And then I told them when I come back from that, I really am planning to be the same style of coach, just with him attached to me kind of. So I think initially it was more, I kind of brought my motherhood into my career. As he's gotten a little bit older and he just turned 3, it's a little bit more of a balance, because it's not good for him necessarily just to be coming to the job all the time. But what I would say is, I really do believe and Patrick and I, my husband, like we talked about this, we had, a child a little bit older, we're more established in our career. Like we really like being career people and we really like being parents, and we're unapologetic about not being able to be, everything to everyone at all times. So we definitely are fortunate to have great childcare, and they're the most amazing people in the world, and we value that. And I'm also open to sort of expose Jordan to my work things, because that works for us, right? Like if he's around the team and me, then he's more a part of it. I definitely feel like the kind of time that I need separate from work and separate from him, workouts or a walk or a conversation with a friend. That's not, me chasing him over here. Like everyone, this quarantine thing has been interesting, because he has no problem with me getting up and going to work or going wherever, right? A little bit as he got older, mommy, can I come to the arena, kind of thing. But generally he's no problem. Well, now if I'm working upstairs and he can see me and hear me like everyone else, it's a little bit harder. But I've also been very okay, unless it's something like this where I can't physically, go to him, to just be like, I can do the work later and let me hang out with him. So we love Cleveland. I actually went to
beyond what's your favorite about Cleveland?
Well, so we love the Botanical Garden and we're members there. So I'm fortunate that Jordan is too young. He doesn't really understand this whole thing, right? Like the beginning, I would wake up and say, what do you want to do today? And he'd say, I want to go to the Children's Museum or the Botanical Garden. I'd be, oh, sorry, buddy, it's closed. Do you want to go outside? And he'd be like, okay.
Right.
Well, the other day he mentioned the Botanical Garden. So I thought, let me just look online. Like maybe they're open. I don't know. We haven't done anything. Like we're told, we're pretty strict about lockdown. And I saw that if you're a member, which we are, the Holden Arboretum is open for members, and you have to sign up for a time. So I'd never been there. It was magical. He and I went alone. We went through the trails. We saw a snake, which really scared me. We saw these flowers, and I love Cleveland. I love that it's got real culture, really good food, progressive kind of stuff, but loves its sports teams, but still really accessible, right? Like you can just get anywhere and do neat things, and the people have been wonderful. So we're really happy here. And, my husband's been unbelievable about, he's never lived anywhere but California, and he loves it as well. So it's been really fun for us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
You guys, that was a wonderful question and answer session. I have to be honest, one of the best I've heard. Good job. Thank you. Wonderful. Well, Lindsay, thank you for your time and your insight and your passion. I hope that all those that are here today are as inspired as I am. I love girl bosses, so good for you. Your drive and your determination has helped you succeed in a world that we all know today is a male-dominated field. So it's so impressive. And thank you for sharing your story. Thank you to everyone, actually, at NCJW for everything that you do and for you do for this community, including putting this event together. I mean, just pulling together in this time with the pandemic, it's so impressive that we were able to do this today. So thank you. And thank you to everyone for being on this webinar, brought to you for free of charge by NCJW Cleveland as part of our Strong Women, Powerful Voices series. I just want to take a quick minute to encourage all of you to renew your annual membership or join this impactful organization. Or you can make a donation to our new emergency relief fund. There is no better time than now. as we are approaching the end of this, our 125th year anniversary of NCJW, working to benefit vulnerable women, children, and families in our community, especially under our current conditions of social distancing. Your membership dollars are needed more than ever to continue our great work in advocacy, community service, and wonderful programming just like today. You do not need to be Jewish, and you don't even need to be a woman to join. I know there are men out here today. So your membership will extend all the way to the end of June 2021. Go to ncjwcleveland.org to make a donation, or we will send a link to you after this presentation. And please mark your calendars, because this Thursday, NCJW is featuring Dr. Suzanne Schnaps and Dr. Lisa Demore. They are both amazing, via Zoom, discussing the psychology of pandemics, how to cope with our new reality. I mean, who doesn't need to hear that, right? So you can register the same way that you registered for this event. And again, thank you to everyone who either spoke, offered questions, coordinated, whatever the case may be. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I hope all of you have a great evening. Thank you so much.
Good job. Oh my gosh, and another fear that I have, Amara, this includes you too. When we go into med school and nurse school, they talking about some 25-page labs and stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you so
So
much.
good. You're all welcome. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, everybody, for having me.
You're
Bye-bye.
welcome. Thank you, Anne. Appreciate you being here. Thanks for coming.